Well, there's one element really that's sort of more important to us as living things than any other, and that's carbon. And carbon is unique, although all elements, of course, unique. It's unique in having a greater number of ways that it can combine with other elements than any other element. Almost infinite possibilities of combining with elements, and that's how it has been the key to life. And the other key elements for life are oxygen, because we need it to breathe, but it also is as part of the components of amino acid things. Oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So really there's 5 elements, and those are almost like the building blocks of amino acids and DNA. And there's a lot of talk about carbon these days, about carbon capture and things like that. And trees, for instance, are a fantastic way of capturing carbon, because trees and wood is basically made mostly of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But carbon and those other 4 elements are not the only ones that you need actually for life. There are a few others as well that are not quite so obvious. Copper, you think, well, what use is copper to living things? But in fact, there's quite a few things. There's little wood lice that you see scuttling around the carpet, or crabs and shrimps and things like that. They actually have a copper compound in their blood. Rather than hemoglobin, which we have, which has iron, they have copper. Also, there's an enzyme that contains copper that gives rise to sort of dark pigments. So if you don't have that enzyme, copper-containing enzyme, you will be an albino. You'll have no colour at all. And there are other elements like zinc and molybdenum that are used in other enzymes that help to remove alcohol from your bloodstream, which can be useful. The elements that tend to occur a lot in rocks, for instance, meteorites, are the ones that are common. And one of the most common elements of all is silicon. And you think, right, there'll be lots and lots of silicon in living things. And there isn't. There's actually amazingly little. So the few things that there are radiolarians and diatoms, which are microscopic creatures that most people won't have heard of, and also glass sponges, and those are made of silica, which is silicon and oxygen. So even though silicon is so abundant, it's hardly used at all in living things, which seems a bit odd. Another element that people may not realise is quite common in living things and various proteins is sulfur. And actually you soon become aware of sulfur being part of your hair. If you ever singe your hair, it smells bad. A lot of the sort of bad smelling chemicals are sulfur compounds. So hair and feathers contain sulfur, which is why they smell bad when they're singed. In life there are a few elements we need in tiny amounts in order to be healthy, but there are also some other elements which we definitely don't want. And these are the poisonous elements, the elements of death. And people will be familiar with some of them, such as lead and arsenic and mercury. And these have been used a lot in the past. So, for instance, mercury was a very important component for making hats in the past, which is why not good for your health. It would tend to affect the nervous system, which is why people sometimes said mad as a hatter. So the reason that these elements, and there are others of them, quite a lot of the heavy metals do this, they interfere with the way that the body works, and so they stop various processes happening, and so ultimately it causes you to become very ill or even dead. And some are very much worse than others. There are some that just a tiny, tiny fraction of a gram can be fatal. Others are less so. Some of them you can actually develop immunity to. Some of these poisonous elements have other uses, and we didn't really know that the elements were poisonous when they were being used. So lead is perhaps best known. So it was used for pipes and plumbing, which is where the word comes from, because the Latin word for lead is plumbum, and that's where plumbing comes from, because it's soft and you can make it into pipes and containers very, very easily. So it was used very widely for that, which meant that everybody who was drinking water or wine coming from lead vessels or lead pipes was slowly getting poisoned. And it was also used in petrol until perhaps 30 years ago as an ingredient, which meant that everybody up until about the 1980s had slight lead poisoning. Well, because certain elements have a particular effect on the body, it's inevitable that they've, over the years and centuries, have actually been used as medicines. And some are very, very effective medicines, particularly today, because we understand how these elements actually interact with the body. But in the past, there wasn't such a great degree of understanding of what was going on. So sometimes elements which we used, which really you shouldn't, they might have kind of cured the disease, but they might also have been helping to kill the patient. So there are examples of mercury was very commonly used. We know it's extremely toxic, but it was also quite good at curing quite a range of diseases. It was even used in teething powder for babies until the 1950s. There's another strange one, an element called bismuth, which is actually, it's a heavy metal, and it sits in a group of elements which includes lead and polonium and thallium and tellurium. And that little corner is often known as poisoner's corner because the elements there are mostly pretty toxic, and bismuth sits bang in the middle of that, and it's not toxic at all. And it's used to settle stomachs. A compound of bismuth is used to settle your stomach if you have a bit of indigestion. And this has been known for a long time. Lots and lots of medicines use this bismuth compound.